They said it was just a few extra hours. I said no and lost everything. But what they didn't know was that firing me was the worst mistake they could have made. It started like it always did, with a manager leaning against the break room door, pretending to make small talk. "You think you could cover a few extra hours tonight, man? We're short again." I stared down at my coffee, pretending I hadn't heard, but I had. I always did, and every time I felt that same knot twist in my stomach. I'd been working at the warehouse for almost 7 years. Never complained, never slacked. I showed up early, left late, filled in when others called off. I didn't mind hard work, never have, but lately it felt like they were squeezing us dry. Overtime used to be optional, then it became strongly encouraged. And now if you said no, they looked at you like you just slapped someone's kid. The unspoken rule was clear: your time didn't belong to you anymore. That day I was running on fumes. I had barely seen my kids all week. My wife had been texting, asking if I'd make it to dinner for once. My back ached, my hands were raw, and I just couldn't. I looked up at the manager and said, "Not tonight, I've got to get home." He blinked like he couldn't believe it, then he smiled that tight-lipped corporate smile. "Sure, no problem." But I knew better. I saw the message in his eyes. I'd just broken the silent code. The rest of the shift crawled by. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if I should have just caved. But deep down, something told me I'd done the right thing. For once, I'd chosen me. When I clocked out, I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. I didn't know that by the next morning, that one no would change everything. That it would cost me my job and set something much bigger in motion. The next morning felt off from the moment I walked in. The usual greetings were shorter. A few coworkers wouldn't meet my eyes. Even my supervisor, Dan, who used to chat with me about football, just gave a stiff nod and turned away. By lunchtime, I was already bracing for it. Sure enough, just after 2 p.m., I got called into the office. I walked in and saw Dan sitting beside a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as someone from HR. Her voice was cold, practiced. She started with the usual script: "We appreciate your service. This is a business decision," and then, "Your employment is being terminated, effective immediately." I couldn't even process the words at first. "Wait, what, why?" She gave a polite smile. "You declined mandatory overtime during a period of critical staffing shortages. This goes against our current operational policy." I turned to Dan. "You've got to be kidding me." He wouldn't look at me, just kept tapping his pen on the desk. "I've worked here for 7 years, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've covered more shifts than I can count. And the one time I say no, because I need a night with my family, you fire me." The HR woman kept talking, something about final paychecks and Cobra insurance. But I couldn't hear her anymore. My ears were ringing. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood up. My hands were shaking, not from anger, at least not yet, but from pure disbelief. I was disposable. After all that time, all that loyalty, I was just tossed out. As I walked out of the office carrying a cardboard box with my stuff, I avoided the stares. Some people looked away. A few looked sorry, but nobody said a word. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably my wife wondering when I'd be home. But I couldn't move. I just sat there, stunned, humiliated. I didn't know what I was going to tell her. I didn't know what I was going to do. All I knew was that everything had just changed, and not by choice. I didn't go straight home. I parked 2 blocks away from the house and just sat there for a while. My phone buzzed again, missed calls from my wife, a text from my son asking if I was bringing home ice cream like I promised. That one hit me the hardest. I'd been looking forward to dinner all day. My wife had planned a home-cooked meal, something simple, but we hadn't had a family night in weeks. I'd promised I'd make it this time. That's why I said no to the overtime. That's why I got fired. I finally worked up the nerve to go inside. The moment I walked through the door, I saw the table was already set. The kids were laughing in the living room. My wife stepped out of the kitchen, smiling. "You made it," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. I almost didn't believe it. I tried to smile back, but I guess my face gave me away. "What happened?" she asked, her voice softening. I pulled her aside and told her everything. I kept my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. I expected her to be angry. I expected a "why didn't you just do the shift?" or a "what are we going to do now?" But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she reached for my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." That nearly broke me. I sat down at the table with the kids, and for the next hour I forced myself to smile. I laughed when they told stories about their day. I passed the mashed potatoes and nodded like everything was fine. But inside, I felt like a failure. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, we sat on the couch in silence. I stared at the floor while she rubbed my back gently. That silence held everything I couldn't say, the fear, the shame, the weight of not knowing what came next. "I just wanted one night with you guys," I whispered. "I know," she said, "and you got it. That means something." Maybe it did, but all I could feel in that moment was the pressure building and the fear that I'd let everyone down. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. My body was ready for the grind, but there was nowhere to go. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun come up with a cold cup of coffee in my hands. The silence felt heavier than usual. My wife had already left for her shift at the clinic, and the kids were still asleep. That quiet gave my thoughts too much room to grow. What if I'd just done the overtime? The question kept circling in my head like a buzzard. I knew I was tired. I knew I needed that evening at home. But still, a voice inside me whispered, maybe you should have just sucked it up. One more shift wouldn't have killed you. I opened my laptop and started looking at job listings. Nothing looked promising. Most wanted weekend availability, open schedule, and a flexible mindset. That was corporate code for "we own you." My inbox had one message from the company. A bland, auto-generated email confirming my termination, along with a survey asking me how they'd done. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without replying. Later, I took a walk just to clear my head. The neighborhood felt different in the middle of the day. People were at work, yards were quiet. I felt like I didn't belong, like I'd slipped out of sync with the rest of the world. By the time I got back home, I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. That night, after the kids went to bed, my wife sat next to me on the couch again. I finally said it out loud. "Maybe I made a mistake." She turned toward me, her eyes soft but steady. "Or maybe you finally drew a line that needed to be drawn." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But all I felt was this gnawing doubt. I didn't feel brave, I didn't feel right, I felt small. And alone. I didn't know that soon that feeling would shift, that I wasn't as alone as I thought. It started with a text from Marco, a forklift operator I used to work with. "Man, I heard what happened. That's messed up. You didn't deserve that." I stared at the screen for a while before replying. "Thanks, just trying to figure out what's next." He answered almost instantly. "You're not the only one. They wrote me up last week for clocking out 2 minutes early." 2 minutes, that was it. I didn't expect anything more, but later that day, I got a message from Jasmine, one of the packers in receiving. Then another from Tyrell, who used to share my shift. All of them said the same thing. They're pushing us too hard. We're all exhausted. One message hit different. I was fired last month for calling out sick. I had a doctor's note, didn't matter. It felt like a dam was breaking, and I wasn't the only one who had been drowning. I'd thought I was alone in this, just another worker who didn't toe the line. But now I was starting to see a pattern. And that pattern was ugly. I spent the whole evening reading, scrolling, rereading. Some people were scared to talk. Others unloaded years of frustration into paragraphs. Over and over, I saw the same words: burned out, used, ignored, afraid. They weren't just venting, they were reaching out. I sat with that feeling for a long time. A strange, slow-burning anger started to form, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that simmers, controlled, focused. These weren't isolated stories. They were pieces of the same machine, breaking people down one by one. And the thing that made me the angriest: nobody had spoken up before, not publicly, not loud enough to matter. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I didn't know what I was writing at first, just thoughts, feelings, bits of people's stories. But by the time I was done, it looked like a manifesto. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, not yet. But something had started. And this time, I wasn't the only one looking for change. By the end of the week, I had over 24 messages from current and former coworkers. Some were angry, some were just tired. All of them had stories, some worse than mine. One guy said he had worked 21 days straight without a single day off. Another told me she was pregnant when they let her go for poor performance. It wasn't just unfair, it was a pattern of control. Fear was how they ran the place, quiet fear, the kind that keeps people compliant. The kind I'd lived with for years without realizing it. And now I saw it everywhere. But seeing it and doing something about it were two very different things. I spent hours researching labor rights, reading about unions, watching videos of protests and walkouts. I wasn't trying to become an activist, I was just looking for answers. But the more I learned, the more the fog in my head started to clear. I started replying to those messages, not just sorry you went through that, but real conversations. I asked questions, I listened. I told them about the little document I'd written. A few asked to read it. One night I got a call from Marco. He said, "Look, man, people are scared, but they're also listening. You're saying stuff we've all been thinking." His words hit me harder than I expected. Me, I was no leader. I was just a guy who said no once and got canned. But maybe that was exactly why they were paying attention, because I knew what it felt like to speak up and get burned. I told Marco I was thinking about getting a few people together, just to talk, share stories, maybe see if we had options. He paused, then said, "If you call that meeting, I'll be there." That night I sat down with my wife and told her what I was planning. I half expected her to worry, but instead she nodded and said, "If you don't do it, who will?" That was the moment something changed in me. I was still scared, but now I understood something. They were afraid too. And maybe, just maybe, that meant we had a shot. The first meeting was in the back room of a community center that smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaning supplies. I didn't expect many people to show up, maybe 4 or 5 tops. But by the time I looked up from adjusting the chairs, there were over a dozen. Some I recognized, coworkers from the warehouse. Others I barely knew, former employees or friends of friends who'd heard what I was trying to do. A few had their arms crossed, skeptical. A couple looked nervous, but they were all there. That meant something. I didn't come in with a speech, just the document I'd written and a feeling in my chest I couldn't ignore anymore. I started by telling them my story, what happened the night I said no, how I was let go, how the messages started coming in afterward. I talked about what I'd learned, not just about our rights, but about how easy it is to forget we have rights when we're too tired or afraid to use them. Then I looked around the room and asked one question. Do you think we deserve better? There was silence at first, and then Marco nodded. Hell yes, we do, he said. Others joined in, slowly at first, then more confidently. People started opening up. Stories poured out, some I'd already heard through texts, others I hadn't. One woman teared up as she described being denied time off for her son's surgery. A guy in the corner said he still had nightmares about work. It wasn't just venting, it was validation. We'd all been told in subtle and not so subtle ways that our pain didn't matter, but here in that small room it did. By the end of the night we had a list, not just of problems but of people willing to speak up, to organize, to push back. It wasn't a union yet, it wasn't even a movement, not officially, but it was a spark. As we left the building, someone taped a handwritten sign to the door. It read, "We deserve better." And standing there in the cold night air, I realized, for the first time, I actually believed it. We thought we were careful at first, small meetings, whispered conversations, passing notes, but word got out faster than I expected. By the end of the second week, management knew. I could feel it in the way Dan's eyes narrowed every time I walked by. The tension was thick, like a storm about to break. One morning, I was called into the office again. This time, it wasn't HR. It was the plant manager himself. He was colder than anyone I'd seen before. "We're aware of your activities," he said, emphasizing the word like it was a crime. "I suggest you reconsider your actions. This company values loyalty and teamwork. Disrupting operations will have consequences." I looked at him, my throat dry, but something inside me refused to back down. "I'm not trying to disrupt," I said quietly. "I'm trying to make things better." He didn't respond, just stared for a moment, then dismissed me. After that, things got worse. More people started disappearing from work, not just fired. Some resigned under pressure, others were asked to take a break with no clear return date. The vibe in the warehouse turned darker. Fear mixed with anger, but instead of backing down, the small group we had started to grow. One day, a few of us wore buttons we made that said, "Respect our time." By lunchtime, half the floor was wearing them. Management noticed. The next day, the buttons were gone. Safety hazard, they said. But the message was clear. We were no longer invisible. Every whispered conversation became louder. Every worried glance carried hope. And as the pressure mounted, I could see people changing, from scared, beaten-down workers to fighters. Me, I still felt the weight of what I'd started. The fear of losing everything again was always there. But the fire that had been growing inside me refused to be put out. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. The days after the warning from the plant manager felt like walking a tightrope. Every move we made was watched, every conversation seemed to echo in the halls. But instead of breaking us, the pressure pushed us closer together. We started organizing shifts to cover for those who were suddenly missing. We shared rides, swapped childcare duties, and even pooled money to help those struggling to pay bills. It wasn't just about the fight anymore, it was about family. Word spread beyond the warehouse walls. Local community centers, small businesses, even a few local news outlets began asking questions. People wanted to know why workers were disappearing, why overtime was mandatory but unpaid, why no one was allowed to say no. Suddenly, we weren't just a group of frustrated workers, we were a movement. I found myself speaking at meetings, trying to put into words what so many felt but couldn't say. My voice cracked sometimes, but the crowd's nods and applause gave me strength. It wasn't about me being a leader. It was about being their voice when they felt voiceless. One afternoon, we held a peaceful rally outside the warehouse gates. It was the first time many of us dared to stand up together in public. Signs reading "fair hours, fair pay, and respect our time" filled the street. The energy was electric, hopeful but tense. Management tried to intimidate us with threats of legal action, but it only fueled the fire. By the end of the week, other warehouses started reaching out. They wanted to join, to share their stories, to stand united. I thought back to that night I got fired for saying no. If someone had told me then that this is where it would lead, that my refusal to give up my time would inspire a movement, I wouldn't have believed it. But here we were, together. Stronger, ready. It's been nearly a year since that day I said no to overtime and got fired. Looking back, I don't recognize the man who sat in his car, stunned and scared, clutching a cardboard box filled with his belongings. That man felt small, powerless, alone. But this man, right now, stands at the front of a crowd of hundreds of workers, holding a megaphone, their voices echoing through the streets. I lead a workers' movement that's no longer about one person's struggle. It's about justice, respect, and the simple truth that nobody should have to sacrifice their life just to keep a job. We've fought for better schedules, safer working conditions, and fair pay for overtime. Some days it feels like moving a mountain. Other days it feels like we're finally breaking through. My wife says she's proud. My kids think I'm a hero, but I know it's not about me. It's about every single worker who's been told their time doesn't matter. Every person who's ever been afraid to say no. This movement has taught me what courage really means. It's not the absence of fear, it's the choice to keep going because of it. I still have doubts, I still have sleepless nights, but I'm no longer alone. And that makes all the difference. When I was fired for refusing overtime, I thought it was the end. Instead, it was just the beginning.